Madam Chair, we are live.
All right, well, thank you everybody for joining us again for ACC Community Police Advisory Board Development Task Force meeting. This is October 7th, 3 p.m. Did everyone have an opportunity to review the meeting notes from last week?
Yes, ma'am.
If so, I would like to make a motion for us to approve the meeting notes. Will someone second that motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
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 If anyone opposed, say nay. All right, so I would like to move to approving the current agenda, but I would also need to make an amendment for us to have a continuance for the presentation of summary recommendations based on past discussions. That's item number B on the agenda. So I would like to make a motion for us to approve the agenda with the amendment for topic B.
So moved.
All right, someone second that?
I second.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed, say nay. All right, the ayes have it. We can move forward. All right, so far, and what I'm gonna also do is share the link with all the members, so you can go on there and make notes. So based on our previous meetings, this topic is just for us to begin to summarize everything that we discussed and the basic recommendations that we're going to make to Athens-Clarke County Mayor and Commission. So in summary, I'm going to start out with the structure and function. And there's a lot, like once I start going over it, I realize that we're probably going to need 2 meetings to go through it and for you guys to add your notes on it. And then a third meeting to probably go back and like finalize it based on the notes that everyone adds on it. You know what I mean? So, so the recommendations so far to properly serve the residents of Athens-Clarke County, the Police Advisory Task Force would like to recommend that a civilian oversight board is established. It should be a hybrid model, which would consist of an auditor, monitor, review board approach. Auditor, monitor, review board approach. So based on the discussions that we had with Leanna being involved, and then I had to stop at some places because it wasn't clear to me what we wanted. So when the structure and function, we recommend for this agency to accept complaints of police misconduct and be open to accepting variations of those complaints. This agency will review the complaints and can monitor the investigative process in addition to offering both policy recommendations following the outcome of the investigation. The auditor can still examine patterns, trends, practices to make policy changes, recommendations. It is also recommended that the review board is made up of Athens-Clarke County residents and to be the final decision makers for the complaints disposition. Now, this is the part where I highlighted is what would happen when there's a disagreement between the police department and the oversight agency. It wasn't clear if we were going to recommend for the mayor and commission or whoever is the supervisor. Are we going to make it a general thing? If it whoever is a supervisor or the overseer of the civilian oversight board, they would be the one to if there's a disagreement to kind of settle that disagreement. So that was something I wasn't clear of. So I left that alone, highlighted red. It is recommended that this agency reports a minimum of 2 times per year to the mayor and commission and provide information to the general public. That doesn't mean that it stops them from doing more if they want to do 3 or 4 times a year. We're just recommending that there's a minimum of 2 times per year. So I'll pause there for a minute. Did anything grab your ear that you think that I should add or missed or want to discuss about the disagreement between the police department. Do y'all want to review that again?
Yeah, can we review that again?
All right, so the thing about it is we have to recommend what will happen if there's a disagreement between the mayor, between the police department and the oversight agency. So, Leanna, are you there?
Yes, sorry, I was muted.
So once again, typically, from your experience, who was this person, the overseer?
It's usually whoever, appoints the monitor is usually the person that's also appointing the police chief. So it's usually like the mayor or the city manager. I'm not sure what the structure is for personnel issues there in Athens, but it's usually, if you have a strong mayor form of government, it's usually the mayor. Otherwise, it's the city manager.
So what?
Can I chime in at that point?
I'm sorry.
Sorry, this is Sherry. I'm just asking if I could chime in to add a little something to that.
Yes, please.
So I was just going to clarify that we are a strong manager form of government. So it would be most likely under our current system that the manager would make the decision if there was some sort of disagreement between the two. And then, as far as our personnel system, I think we've talked about that before, and there is a whole sort of appellate or appeals process internally when there are personnel issues. But I think those might be two different types of disagreements. I'm not sure exactly what you might be interested in learning more about, but I just wanted to clarify that we're a strong manager form of government.
It would be a different type of disagreement. This would be it wouldn't be a personnel disagreement. That's what I'm trying to figure out, because it would be a disagreement based on the recommendations or based on the outcome of the investigation. And so basically the review board or the auditor may not agree with the results or whatever that comes out of the investigation. So then who is the one that's going to say, this is how we, who's going to settle the disagreement? So it wouldn't be a personnel issue. It would be like, who would we recommend? And that, I have to go back to the notes, but yeah.
May I ask, Leon, maybe Liana could provide an example in Tucson where they've had to have, is this what you would call a tiebreaker, Liana?
Kind of.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So could you
So-
think of an example maybe that's happened in your world?
I'm trying to think of, not when I was the auditor, but I can think of one that's kind of occurring recently, where the auditor, basically there was a disagreement as to what information would be shared about like an in custody death that the auditor was also involved in, is also involved in reviewing. And I think so both the chief and I don't think it was necessarily a disagreement of what should be shared or should it be shared. It was how much should be shared, or how much information could be shared at the time, based on the fact that there was a criminal investigation ongoing parallel to it. So I think the manager basically was kind of the tiebreaker, but also because there was a lot of community attention on this particular incident, the manager also reported his decision and the reasons for making that decision to the elected officials. In other words, also briefed the mayor and briefed the city council so that everybody was in agreement as to why something wasn't being released at that particular point in time, but with full acknowledgement that when it could be released, it would be released. So basically saying that there's like another level, basically, because your manager reports to your elected officials. So that could be something that would be the next tier of tiebreaker, so to speak, or notification as far as what is transpiring. I mean, and that's just one example.
Can I weigh in for a second, Mocha? This is Chief Sproul.
Sure. Yes.
So two things is, if we're talking about, access to information, or we're talking about something related to an ongoing investigation, I think yeah, the manager might be the appropriate one to break that tie or to settle that. I don't think that you're going to find those kinds of, points where we're going to be in disagreement very often, except in cases like what Leanna talked about, where there's an ongoing criminal investigation at the same time, and then the district attorney and GBI and other folks that may be conducting a criminal investigation may supersede some of the things that we have going on here. Once a case is completed here, and say a disposition is made, so say I decide I'm going to get a person a 1-day suspension, and the monitor says, no, I want to get a person, I think he deserves a 5-day suspension or a termination. We already have an internal county process through a personnel hearing officer, which is like an arbitrator or a mediator that looks at those things. And so I think anything you do beyond, anything you do related to that, you would really have to talk with county HR to make sure that our county processes and procedures with respect to personnel hearings and personnel hearing officers is adhered to. And then I do have one question. I'm not sure I heard exactly what it said. There was something you read about the final decision maker being the board or something like that. I'm not sure what that meant. I was trying to seek some clarification on that.
So so we have the review board component because we did the hybrid approach. So we have the auditor monitor. So I guess the review board would make the final, like if they agree or disagree with the findings of the investigation.
So that would not be the monitor?
It could involve the monitor. If we want to add the auditor, monitor, and the review board, because we created a hybrid model. So it's up to us if we want to make that recommendation to include the auditor, monitor, whatever you want to call that person, because it's a double title, and the review board can make the final disposition together, because we have to, we can include everyone. So did y'all want me to add that?
I just was trying to get clarification. I think it's fine the way it is, but I just was trying to understand what you were saying. That's all.
Okay.
Question.
And, all right. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Well, because I'm just I don't know if it's in the document yet. I'm trying to pull it up on my computer now, but talking about who actually will be overseeing the review board, because wouldn't that be the answer to whoever would settle the dispute? Like, I don't know if we've explicitly talked about where office is going to reside, because I would then imagine that the head of that office would be then the person that would resolve any dispute.
Well, I mean, in the chat, Nakima recommended the mayor and commission or elected officials to be a part of the dispute. I was also thinking the same things for to avoid any conflict of interest, but also to avoid conflict of interest. We had the discussion last week about, I brought up about the county auditor or another chartered officer, as opposed to the city manager, because he's already the overseer of the police department, and the police department has to report to him. So to avoid any conflict of interest, I was recommending for the team to consider other options, even if it's the mayor and commission, for transparency and to avoid any conflict of interest, so that people feel comfortable with coming to this agency on both sides. So that's how we never really settled.
So I think she want to weigh in here, because in order to present the facts and information to the entire board, if they're going to be the final decision maker, that means you'd have to share the information, which would mean you would have to convene that board, which would mean that it's open to the public, which if we had something that we didn't want to share with the public for confidentiality or whatever other reason was a justifiable reason, I think by saying that the board would be, the commission would, and the mayor would be the ones that would be the ones making that determination, you might have a problem with that. Maybe they could do a closed session. I don't know whether the rules would allow that or not. But I think there may be some limitations to being able to get before the entire board, lay the facts out to them without making it into a public meeting.
So maybe it's a good time for me to chime in then with a couple things. I think that as Blaine talked about last week, we have a system set up in the government as to who reports to who. And so without making dramatic changes to that system, I don't know that there's any authority to create this group such that it reports directly to the mayor and commission. I mean, essentially what you'd be having to ask for then is to create a new charter officer, which would require an amendment to the charter, not just an ordinance. So I'm not saying that you can't request that. I'm just saying it doesn't fit within our current system. So the other options you've talked about are placing this under the auditor, who is a charter officer, and then placing this under the manager. Part of the problem, though, is that, for instance, if it's under the auditor, and I'm just trying to think out loud and think of how this would work, the auditor doesn't have any power over the police department. So even if the auditor said, I'm going to side with you all over the police department, the auditor doesn't have any authority to tell the police department what to do. And so that is part of the value of keeping everything under the manager, because the manager is the one who would then have the authority to tell both departments, to really break that tie and have authority over both.
Can I make to that?
Just really quickly, what I just want to finish saying is that the protections then, as Blaine discussed last week, is that Blaine reports directly to the mayor and commission. So if they think that he's not doing anything, they can basically fire him at will at a meeting. So there are protections for that, but anyways, that's how it's designed right now.
Cool. Well, yeah, thank you for that, for those concerns. And I think I would like to address the first one. Yeah, because as I'm thinking about it, we're creating a position that's an auditor monitor, and we already have an auditor's office. And so to me, it really just makes sense for them to, for purposes of keeping information secure, because that's like the auditor has to keep all the information that they are, investigating secure until it is time to present to the public. So there's experience that they have with that in that office. So that's one of the reasons it's a good fit, apart from just having the same name, both being auditors. But then to your point about, the mayor and commission, the city manager having power over the police department. Well, I think the idea here is that the people are supposed to have power over the police department. Like the police are supposed to be accountable to the community. And so we shouldn't be determining where this office should be based on who has more power over the police department, because if anything, what we should be doing is balancing out and separating some of these powers so that we can keep everyone accountable to each other. Because I would hope that the manager's office would still, that they would still be allies to this cause, even if it's not under their office regardless. And as Chief Sproul is in this meeting right now, it's not about power, it's about accountability. And I think that the auditor's office would do that very well.
So can I ask a question, and maybe it'll help with my guidance here? So is the auditor, you're saying it's the county auditor, they're not part of the city government? How is the auditor structured?
Sure, I can speak to that. So the auditor is a charter officer in the same way that our county attorney, the manager, and a few other designations are charter officers. So their powers and duties are specifically outlined in the charter. And then there's actually an ordinance that addresses that too. And the auditor serves at the complete discretion of the of the mayor and commission, just like the manager does. So they can be dismissed just like the manager at any point, basically at a vote of the mayor and commission. I don't know if that helps explain.
Yeah, so it is, the structures, aren't that different across the country. I think last week I mentioned like how in New Orleans, the monitor there, there is a an ethics, and I forgot what the title is, but it basically acts as the county, the city auditor, basically, who is actually appointed by the elected officials. And originally, when the monitor was set up in New Orleans, she reported to this individual. And then there was a conflict between kind of, him controlling her budget and controlling her reports. So there was, and that was just really more of a personality thing, but it didn't go well. So basically she fought to have herself removed from under that, and basically being able to report directly. I think she reports directly to the city manager there, but there's also this a separate ethics board, similar to how you would have like your citizens board. That's also part of the check and balance. But in most other cities, like I said, in Tucson, and I believe in Denver, most of the other ones that have a monitor, they're reporting to the city manager. And that's kind of but that the board itself, because they're appointed by the elected officials, they're also the check and balance, because the board can actually go to the elected officials and say, hey, the monitor isn't doing this. So there's different ways to look at it. But I mean, if you have a strong form of that county, the auditor, I mean, maybe that is a way to remove that potential conflict. Either way, the city manager needs to get involved, because if that county the auditor is coming and saying, oh, this is what my police auditor is saying, and this is the conflict, either way, the manager is going to need to get involved because he is the person who addresses, being able to direct the police department. And if it's a resource question, if it's an issue of, lack of accessibility to information or records. I can tell you, just looking at it from afar, you have a chief that is very cooperative and open to oversight. This really comes into play more often when you don't have that, and so you have to write in things to anticipate that you're not going to have that level of cooperation. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it, because the chief could be here to I'm not saying this about you, chief, but we all know this, here today, gone tomorrow, and you can get another chief that is not as cooperative, and then you're dealing with trying to get some level of authority that you probably should have written in from the very beginning, so that you can avoid that.
And really quickly before we move on, if I could just chime in, because I want to make sure there's a point that isn't missed, because one of the things that Chief Sproul mentioned was a concern about information. And I think Stephanie just a second ago mentioned that, the auditor is used to keeping information confidential. And I just want to make it really clear so everybody understands. I think this is really important, that just because information is in the auditor's office in no way, shape, or form means that it's not subject to the Open Records Act. So while they may be keeping it confidential, like they're not displaying it, they're not putting it out there, the fact that someone gives them information or they collect information from the police department, once it's in their hands, it is completely subject to the Open Records Act. And there is nothing in Georgia law that says that information that you all as a task force or that as our auditor has is not subject to be released. So one of the things that in looking at the ordinance that Phil and Dr. Shannon worked on that I really wanted to highlight for you all is, if you want to have access to these records, there's some really serious concerns out there about how that might imperil investigations, criminal investigations, and how it might imperil victim privacy and things like that. So that's something to think about, not necessarily talk about right this second, but I didn't want an assumption to be made that it would be confidential when it won't be.
Okay, does anyone else have anything to add?
Well, I will chime in that was something, good Lord, 15, 17 years ago when we created our fatality review panel of the Domestic Violence Task Force, that we had to agree by the creation of that to review closed cases where there was no possibility of appeal, or even when we do near fatalities, we have to look at closed cases, and that was a deal breaker. But it was all because of Open Records Act, the ability of that of affecting cases and so forth. And so it has worked for us, and we have utilized that. But what you don't have in that process then is a very quick, nimble, be able to come in right when something happens, because you have to wait until the final disposition of the case. And so it seems to me to hinge on when the kinds of complaints that are typically brought, when in a process that they come, and if they're in an interaction where there's not this big ongoing investigation, that's very different than if it's in the process of a criminal case, especially a felony, because those take so long.
You know, if I can just add a couple of things there. So the normal process for our police investigations is that the investigation has to be completed in 45 days. 10 days after our case is completed, it becomes open record anyway. So once the case is completed, 10 days later, it's going to become open record. So it's not like we would be holding information for a long period of time, but I think it'd be, we would have to hold it until those 10 days. The other piece is that I thought that's what the monitor was doing. I thought that as the investigation was ongoing, the monitor would be there watching us interview people, listening to what's going on, having the ability to ask questions and get information with the understanding that certain things are confidential, that he can't share with others, but he or she would know what's going on and would be there to make sure that we're taking the appropriate steps, asking appropriate questions, not hiding information, and doing what we're supposed to be doing. I think that's the way it works in other places, and that's kind of how I envision it working here.
So, I mean, the chief makes a good point. I mean, that is the whole idea of the auditor monitor role, that you can either audit the investigations when they're all done, when all is said and done, and then you may be collecting information there and may be subject to a public records, since we're talking about public records disclosures, but everything's already done. But you also have the authority to sit in on observing those investigations, but you're not collecting information. So you as the auditor or even the board would not be subject to being asked to release any information, because you're not collecting any information. You have no documents to release. You are just observing and monitoring the process as the auditor going forward to, like the chief says, ask the appropriate questions or ensure that the appropriate questions are being asked during the course of, maybe an investigation that's more high profile or has more, potential, community issues being raised. You want to be involved in that process.
And Madam Chair, I'd like to make one point, and that is, and maybe we can rest a little bit easier thinking in these terms. I know that independence is a key principle that we're looking at for what we're doing here, and independence in many ways is defined by civilian oversight, right? And so I'm comfortable with the fact that both our charter auditor and our city manager are both civilians. So in either case, we do have, civilian oversight that we'd be reporting to that. And I guess my only concern about putting it in the charter auditor's office is, and I asked this question in earnest, I don't know how robust that office is. I do know how robust the city manager's office is, and it's quite robust. And so I think the way that our system is designed, almost no matter what happens, I think inevitably, the city manager role comes into play in some way, shape, or form. So those are just my thoughts.
If I could just speak to that, I mean, it sounds like the reason this system is designed as such is because someone designed it, I think, like in the 90s. And so perhaps we need to maybe think critically about how the system is designed. I mean, that's a lot of the work that we're doing now, and a lot of the work that I mean, just in this movement people are doing all over the place, is like rethinking systems to work better for people. And so I'm just trying to think too. I think I missed that last part about the city manager also being a civilian. Can you elaborate on that? By
that I mean he's not part of the police department. When I say independence, I mean independence from the police department.
Right. Yeah, I guess I'm just seeing it as if the auditor's office, well, yeah, if the city manager has direct kind of control over or is connected with the police department, and the auditor and the city manager are technically on equal footing. It sounds like they're both, you said charter officers, but they are both subject to the mayor and commission just saying, okay, you guys don't work for us anymore. And so in that way, because we have the duties, things have to be done, and then things have to be done correctly. So who makes sure that they're done correctly and ethically? That would be an auditor. And so that's why I can see both kind of being like equal positions in terms of like power and capacity. That might not be true for the size of the office itself, but I feel like adding an auditor to the auditor's office in some ways can just like reinforce why there's a necessity to increase that capacity anyway. So those are the 2 points that I want to make, that if Blaine is already, or sorry, the city manager is already in kind of direct control over the police department, then it makes sense to have that equal balance of power, and put this office under the auditor, put the auditor in the auditor's office. And then lastly, I just want to speak to the, are we going to talk about the video that was sent out at all? I guess we can go through this agenda first, but I really disturbed.
I saw the video. Yeah, I saw the video that was sent out, and I guess there would have to be amendment made for that to be added to the portion of the agenda. But I would have to pause on something and continue the conversation next week, which we're going to continue anyway.
Really quickly, if I could just speak up about the auditor position, as I think Phil has raised some interesting points, but I want to make it clear to everyone that this position is not in any way, shape, or form under what the auditor's job is currently. The auditor is, as again, a charter officer, and so their duties and responsibilities are very specifically outlined in both the charter and ordinances. That doesn't mean it couldn't be changed. I just want to make it clear that if that's your recommendation, it would require both an amendment to the charter, I believe, as well as an amendment to the ordinance that dictates what they do. And to Phil's point, the auditor is a very, very small office. I think it's the auditor herself, and then maybe 2 or 3 other people. I don't know for sure, and I can't find a directory online to tell me, but it's a very small office, and so there is something to be said for access to resources in a different way than the manager's office has.
And I would just chime in and say that we all got to keep in mind that these are recommendations. We're not making the final decision. So it's up to the mayor and commission and whoever, that makes the final decision to actually do maybe a little bit extra research and consider whether or not they want to make a change to the charter, if they want to keep the ordinance the way it is. So I think in general, I would feel that, if the task force is okay, is to leave it like the overseer of the civilian oversight board will settle disagreements, whoever the overseer may be, we don't know that yet, but would settle disagreements between the police department and oversight agency. The task force would also like Athens-Clarke County government to consider having the auditor or the mayor and commission to be the overseers or assisting with the settlement. And they can make that final decision instead of us going back and forth, because again, these are just our recommendations.
And I apologize, I missed last week, and so perhaps this was discussed then and I missed it in the minutes, but it seems to me from the chat and some of the comments here and the uncertainty of whether to go under county manager or the auditor, and the auditor having a very different job description. Was it rejected the idea of recommending that the monitor be a charter officer? Was that
that's a good idea.
And rejected? I mean, if we're just making a recommendation, but I'm hearing that people want this independence and transparency and whatever, then what is the downside of recommending that the monitor be a charter officer? And then they're on equal footing in terms of reporting directly to mayor and commission as the auditor and the county manager and the other charter positions. Was that just dispatched? Were there reasons why that was not thought to be a good recommendation, or has that?
Discuss that. That's a good one. That's a good recommendation. I remember something about that I was reading about the charter, the variation between the charter and the ordinance, and how those things would have to change if we wanted to write something into the charter. But
yes, it would require an additional step. It's not just an ordinance. It's also changing the county charter. That's a big thing. And perhaps it was discussed and decided that was not the right thing to ask for. But that seems to me where people where many people's energy seems to be, or heart seem to be, to place it at that level. So it's responding to that. To me, putting it under the auditor, which doesn't really have anything to do with this, is kind of adding a layer of something that doesn't seem necessary to me. So I feel like personally I would say either go under the county manager's office for efficiency and staying with the current system, or go with recommending that the charter be changed to create this additional position. But if folks don't like it nesting under the county manager, why not ask for what's wanted?
I mean, we can ask for that. I mean, it's a recommendation. They still can decide what they want to do. I don't see, like, I'm at this point, I'm just wondering why we can't make these recommendations and allow the mayor and commission to decide what's best, or whoever is a part of that process, because we are not the final decision makers. And the whole thing can, things can be added or taken away based on what they believe is best, and based on different laws that we might not know about, so I would like to make that recommendation now that that's brought up. I don't know how everybody else feel about it, but we can think about it and, add it to the meeting, to the agenda to vote on it next week, if we want to just, take some time to process that.
I'm curious, particularly Sherry and also Liana, is there apart from just the added effort and steps to changing the charter, it's like a constitutional amendment versus a statute getting passed. But apart from that, are there downsides to adding a charter officer that are not occurring to me?
So I don't know. I don't know if there may be things I'm not thinking of, and Blaine probably is a better person to speak to this than me, just because he knows more of the intricacies of this. I think the first answer is, like you said, it's just really a lot more difficult. The charter can only be amended by an act of the General Assembly of Georgia, or an ordinance adopted by the Commission of Athens-Clarke County pursuant to the Constitution of the state of Georgia. And there's a whole section that dictates how those kinds of amendments have to happen. So it's just more difficult.
So it would take longer.
It would take a little longer.
It would add a tremendous amount to the timeline.
Right. And I think the other question is just making sure that we have the authority to create a new charter officer. I'm just doing a really quick search. I can't find anything that says that we can't, but I would want to run that by Judd and talk to him about that. As far as, the other issues, I think that the argument would be that by, if you're creating a charter officer, you're really creating this totally independent individual, which is great. But to Phil's argument about resources, there may be increased costs and difficulties that wouldn't necessarily exist if this was under a different department and maybe was more integrated into already existing systems, not necessarily the police department, but just, but that's the only thing I can think of at the moment. But there may be other things. I don't know if Sarah, if you have any ideas, if you want to chime in from your Sarah George, and then Leanna, certainly. I know you.
I can't think of any other place. I'm kind of going through my head here on different agencies. I can't think of anywhere that it's been done like that. I mean, certainly you would give that, that level of independence for sure. If you had if that was a separate position, a chartered position, like you say, on equal level of authority, as basically you would be giving it equal to the city manager. But you would probably still run into the situation of okay, so this is a chartered position with this level of authority, but they still have no authority over making, the city manager is the one that would still be directing the police chief to make any changes or recommendation or implement things. So you would still run into that, that somebody else has that level of authority over the department if you're not getting the level of cooperation. So I don't know, you probably still have that conflict, I would think.
Yeah, and I would add as well that while it's exciting to think about some of the positives that that level of independence would bring, one of the other negatives is that if we got something wrong, it's so hard to fix down the road, because you basically have to amend the charter. So.
Okay. So how about this? How about we pause there for a minute and continue the conversation next week? Let us all think about this. There is some good points that were brought up here today from from what Philip just said about the independence. There's some things to consider. So if we all agree, can we pause on that for a moment?
Yes, I would like that. My fellow members have given me a lot to think about today, so to have a little bit more time to ruminate on that would be helpful.
Okay, good. And what I will do is share the link with the rest of the summary so y'all can add notes to it, and then we'll come back to it next week. All right, so, woo.
Madam Chair, my head is swimming too, and I think it would be good for us to
Should we make a vote?
it's yeah, and I'm glad that these questions are being asked though, and these things have been hashed out, because perhaps someone on the call can do some research and maybe some information that will help us in making decisions. And like Phil said, that we want to get it right, because if we're talking about adjusting the charter, that's a process, and undoing something is a process. And so, that's what we're trying to avoid with these open conversations. And so I second that.
Okay.
Well, just one last thing before we leave it completely. I would hold open the possibility too that there could be the primary recommendation and then perhaps a secondary. So for example, if recommending that it be a charter officer seems like biting off too much at this point, there could be a recommendation of where it would nest under our current structure, with a secondary recommendation that the concept of placing it under, as a charter officer, be considered over time, and that this was something that that was considered, and so it provides perhaps a direction ongoing beyond just the initial establishment of the position in the board.
Okay. I like the primary and the secondary. And if you could, when I share the notes, if you could add that I highlighted red in that area. And then next week, I guess we can make that decision, vote on it, and make that decision.
Now, are the notes different than I've been reading off the draft ordinance. Are the notes different from that?
I have been summarizing like our recommendations based on our discussion in the meeting notes.
Oh, okay.
So for us to go back over everything that we discussed and wanted in summary, because it was just a lot of notes and a lot of, conversations, and try to pull it all together so that we can go back again and say, okay, yes, this is what we want. You know what I mean? And add the final touches to it.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh gosh. Okay. So, Shane, did you want to, should we make a motion to pause on topic B and continue the conversation next week?
Yes, man. I think that'll be the best thing to do at this point.
Okay. So, thank you, Philip. All in favor, say aye.
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 All right, anyone opposed, say nay. All right, so we will move to the next topic in the agenda, and that was the review of the recommended ordinance. Philip and Sarah, did you want to go over that? Or did anyone have any questions or anything that they thought was missing from there?
I had a question about the term limits. And again, I apologize for missing last week, so perhaps that was discussed and changed, but it looked like the recommended term was 4 years. And I had remembered us discussing a shorter term given the subject matter at hand with an option to re-up. So I was just wondering if that was an intentional change of direction or if that was put in the draft and maybe copied from another place. And
thank you for that. It was not. In fact, that's exactly the type of eagle eye point that I was hoping our fellow members would find, because it's a fairly large document at 10 or 11 pages long. And what we did basically is, based on Liana's advice, we found a city that had done the closest thing to what we were trying to do, which is Madison, Wisconsin. And we used a lot of their language. So that, I believe, came from their language, but Sherry might remember better than I on that particular point, which I want to thank Sherry, by the way. She has intricately gone down line by line of this and has made some very, very helpful markups that we need to get to you guys, because the copy that you guys got, Sherry has updated it very recently and marked it up very recently and made some good changes. So with Sarah George's help, and thank you, Sarah George, as well, for all that you've done to get these documents out to people, we can do that. But if a 2-year term is the will of this body, then absolutely we can reflect that in the language of this draft.
I think that was agreed on in a meeting several meetings ago. The idea of a 2-year term with an option of a second 2-year term, so a total of 4 years, but divided so that people don't get burned out. And then we did discuss a staggering, as you all have indicated in the draft, but so that it's not everybody turning over at once.
Absolutely. And my partner in helping with this draft, Dr. Sarah Shannon, I don't think she's with us today, right?
She is not.
Okay. All right. So I'm happy to take any questions based on the draft that we had. Some of the things that stood out to me, the Madison draft, the Madison ordinance really is pretty close to what we're doing. So Liana did a good job in finding us one, but there are some things in there that they had that we don't have. Their diversity components of the population of Madison, Wisconsin is a little bit different than our diversity makeup in Athens-Clarke County. So that's obviously something that we'll need to reflect upon. I don't think we've gone into great depth in our meetings as to the individual makeup of the board and their background. I think we've referred several times to the type of people. Obviously, we want them to be Athens-Clarke County residents. There's an interesting quirk in the Madison draft that we also put in ours, that if we do live in a very in a society where people move around a lot, right? And so if someone, temporarily lives in Madison County, with a relative for a few months or something, they need to eventually move back to Athens-Clarke County, before the end of their term if they want to be reappointed. So there were some interesting quirks like that. But in terms of the diversity of it, I think we would probably be on board. It'd be interesting to hear from my colleagues of the different communities that we want to ensure are represented on this body. Obvious ones come to mind: African American membership, LGBTQ membership, Latinx membership. I mean, but it's up to us to make that clear, I think, when we assemble this.
If I can make a suggestion to that point, I think the percentage of folks could have criminal backgrounds, or because we want to say from the communities that are over policed and also who have been in jail themselves and know that system from the inside. like a percentage, maybe like 30% or 40%?
Absolutely, Stephanie. That's a very good point. And there's a section, and forgive me for not being able to recall exactly what page it's on, but in the draft, it does go in depth into different areas, and that is something I think we should be discussing. Also, there are other categories as well. So I don't want even just the types of people that you and I have talked about on this call today, Stephanie, to limit us, because there are several different areas that I think we need to explore to make sure we have a very comprehensive representation.
I didn't see victims of crime on the draft, and I think that's one. Not just someone like a survivor of domestic violence, but I think any victim of a crime would have an interesting perspective as well that should be a part of it.
I agree. And then also, would from the video be considered the victim of a crime from the video yesterday, or that Blaine Williams sent to us with his commentary this morning? So I would be careful about that, because the way that we view crime and victimhood can be very skewed towards working against communities of colors and communities that are over policed. But I do think that's a good point to discuss and bring up.
I would agree to that too as well. So how do we want to add our comments to these documents so that it's not difficult for Philip and Sherry? Because those are some good points, and there's a lot more. So we're gonna have to pick this back up as well next week, because
can that be shared in Drive or something for editing, or?
Yes, it's shared in the Drive. You can click on it. I'm in it right now. I can see.
Unfortunately, I did only share it for editing for like 3 or 4 people, because my thoughts were that if we had 10 people editing in to get out of whack. But I will gladly defer to the will, though, of whatever y'all think is best in editing. But Sherry has done some significant markups, I know.
I would say
the email
the comment box on the side, to where we don't edit it, we're not touching it, but we can add our comments. And then when Sherry and you are going through it, then you can take care of inputting it, because I see there's a lot of still work. There's still work being done.
Yes. Okay. That's it. Thank you, Madam Chair. That's a very good idea.
All right. Does anyone else have any? Joan, you were going to say something. Are you okay? You're muted.
Just saying, I do need to sign off for something else at 4.
Yes.
Comments in the Google Drive, or emailing comments to Sherry or Philip for points to consider or suggested changes?
Yeah, so you'll be able to do it in the comment box, but you won't be able to edit.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
And just to clarify, if you would please put those in the comment sections. That way we know they're all going to one place, and so Sherry won't be getting some emails and I won't be getting some emails. If y'all don't mind, let's agree to put it all in the Google comment section.
Yes. So you have to actually open the Drive and put it directly in the Google comment section there, as opposed to just sending it through the email. Okay. All right. So I would like for us to, there's 2 things. We had there was a video that was sent out today that Stephanie and I would like to discuss as well, but I have to jump on another call. So I would like to make a motion for us to continue this conversation and to add the video that was sent out to us to the agenda for next week.
So moved.
All right. Anyone want to second that?
I second, and Nakima second.
All right, thank you. So all in favor, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed, say nay. And we will close out the meeting. We will add all those items to next week agenda and continue the conversation.
Okay, Madam Chair, I move we adjourn.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it. I
All
second
right,
that.
thank you.
Till next week.
All right. Thank you, Philip.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
We actually need a vote.
Oh, yeah, okay. Aye.
We gotta vote all over again? Okay.
Did
All
you say,
right. So
I move to adjourn?
I second.
all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. We shall adjourn. Thank you.
Thank y'all.